Well, hello everyone, it's John Lockland here. I am the director of Forum for Democracy International. Welcome to this week's forum. My co-hosts Peter Lavelle in Moscow and Jeremy Nell in Cape Town are delighted to welcome as our guests this week to discuss EU censorship, Professor Stevan Gajic from Belgrade, who's momentarily disappeared from the screen. I hope he'll be back in a minute. And I think Professor also Tarik Cyril Amar from Koç University in Istanbul. Stevan Gajic, I think, has here he is. He's come back.
I can hear you.
Let me go to Tarik Cyril Amar. Our subject this week is EU censorship. We've discussed this and related topics many times on the forum. Indeed, we had Roger Köppel, the editor and owner, indeed, of Weltwoche in Switzerland, as our guest a week or two ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, to discuss the sanctions that were imposed against a French and Swiss national in December 2025. So our subject then was freedom of speech and, you know, what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. So obviously the issue of censorship is connected to that. We've since our broadcast then with Roger Köppel, we've had the publication of the United States House of Representatives Judiciary Committee report on not just EU censorship, but also EU interference in elections. One of the things that the media picked up was that the various tools that the EU has, including legislative tools to censor speech, have been deployed at election time. And I think they listed 6 different countries. It's, of course, this report is a continuation in a very detailed way. It's very long. I've just read it. It must be, nearly 100 pages long or something. It's a continuation, isn't it, of the remarks made 1 year ago, exactly 1 year ago, by J.D. Vance, the vice president at the Munich Security Conference. But its merit lies, I think, in the fact that it's extremely detailed. And when I say detailed, it's not just text. It's got masses of images, of emails and other communications sent by the various European authorities to TikTok and X and Facebook and all the rest of it. Tarik Cyril Amar, perhaps I could go to you first. What do you think is the state of censorship now in the European Union?
I think it's advancing. That's the one word that would come to my mind immediately as an answer to that question. And unfortunately, I would think also that the advance is picking up speed, and there are no signs of it being stopped right now. It's advancing at EU level, which this report is mostly about, although it also talks about some other things. But it's also advancing, as the report mentions in passing, as it were, at national level. In fact, what the EU is doing has had this halo effect on national governments inside Europe and even beyond Europe, which is yet another layer, as it were. And what I find particularly I will add this one point only. What I find particularly disturbing, very disturbing, is the fact that the EU has made up its mind very clearly to act extra legally. And that is the kind word. I would actually call it illegally, but let's use the term extra legally. Because when you read the report and what it says about how the EU thinks about this, then it's very clear that the EU deliberately, explicitly has been targeting speech that is legal and that it also calls non-violative, whatever that means. That is, it has a deliberate strategy for years now, up to a decade at least, of targeting speech of which the bureaucrats who are doing this know that it is within the law. That is, of course, horrific. And that, I point that also out because you have mentioned these sanctions that are used as punitive measures now against essentially dissidents, right, inside the EU. These sanctions are very similar in that sense, in that they are at best extra legal. I would say they certainly contradict actually national laws, for instance, in Germany, but nobody is actually fighting against them. It would be necessary because all of these national governments and the EU in the form of the Commission are colluding on this.
Yeah, we had I made this point actually when we had Roger Köppel on a couple of weeks ago. In the European Union Council decision of 2024, which lays the framework for the sanctions that were imposed on Jacques Beau and Xavier Moreau, the two European citizens, French and Swiss. In that decision from, I think, October 2024, it quotes a report which the European institutions commissioned for themselves and wrote themselves. And that report from some agency or other, I've forgotten which one, says that much of the content that will come under the remit of the sanctions is not legal. So
it's not illegal.
Yeah, it's not legal. So therefore it's not illegal. I beg your pardon. So it's not illegal. Therefore, is legal.
Yes.
And then there's a lot of rubbish about the grey area between war and peace and so on. But in the actual text of the, as I say, of the council decision which creates these sanctions, they allude to this report which says what you've just said, Tarik, which that the content is not legal. If I could go to Stevan Gajic in Belgrade. Stevan, you're from the Institute of European Studies. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Serbia has had its fair share, I would say, of interference from the European Union. Maybe this gives you some sense of Schadenfreude to see the same or similar anyway things being deployed within the European Union, because in the House Judiciary Committee's report, it talks about election interference, but not election interference in EU accession countries, but in fact in EU member states. What's your opinion then of this of the state of censorship in the EU, Stevan? You're on the outside, lucky you, looking in.
Yeah, European Union has always been about control and not about democracy. So control was always painted in words such as European values or shared space of values and such. But in fact, when we look at the institutions, we basically see that the only branch of power, the judicial power, is not actually giving any meaningful laws, which is the European Parliament. And it is only a talking club with good salaries, I would say. So that is why European Union was, in a sense, built corrupt, and it was literally corrupting people within the machinery so that the system functions and so that nobody mentions the question of democracy. 2 years ago, we had a very interesting speech by Ursula von der Leyen in Davos, and she was using all different Orwellian terms such as misinformation, disinformation, and this esoteric term of malinformation. I don't know even how to translate it.
Well, nobody knows what it means, even in English. Sorry.
Was that the speech, Stevan, when she talked about being inoculated? She used a lot of medical. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know that speech. Yeah.
Yeah, and it gave us a clue what is about to follow. The problem was that European Union was preparing for a completely different administration in Washington. That is why, I mean, if you pick somebody from a very Russophobic society, basically society of apartheid like Estonia, for your Minister of Foreign Affairs, that means that you are on a war foot with Russia. So they did that expecting that Kamala Harris will be the successor of Democrat Biden cabinet. But something completely opposite happened, and the transatlantic communication was once again disrupted, and this time in a much more serious sense compared to the period between 2016 and 2020. So the U.S. started to fight an ideological war against the European Union, which is why this program of gaslighting with all these fancy words that are covering the fact that the EU is not a democratic institution came into. So what really is going on is that the EU is like 100 years ago, Austro-Hungarian Empire, an anachronistic power that lost in the competition with its adversaries, which were, let's say, Russia and China in the first row, but all of a sudden the United States became an adversary. And now what they're doing is they're doubling down on the censorship. and that is why we see such acceleration of tension. And I think that this will continue because, according to the new U.S. security strategy, basically U.S. In other words said that it wants to dismantle the European Union. How? It openly supports the, let's say, revisionist right-wing parties. I mean, it's said, it's written in the document. It is talking about cultural genocide, in a sense, happening in Europe and being implemented by the EU leadership, which is something. I mean, that kind of language can take you into jail in Germany. But of course, they cannot jail J.D. Vance or Trump. I mean, they probably would like to, but it's not possible at the moment. So this is why we see such a friction, which culminated in Davos this year, with basically Canadian Prime Minister crying and saying out loud what the rest of the partners from across the Atlantic in the EU think. And I think, as a Serb, this is not surprising, because this coercive talk, this, I would say, colonial in a sense demeanor, was something that we are used to since 2000, since the political changes in Serbia, when practically the EU accession process started, which is a never-ending process, because it's not the point for a country to actually enter the EU, but to always be on the path. Communism is somewhere.
Well, I'm not really sure the U.S. wants to destroy or dismantle the EU. I think they want it pliant, is for sure. To Tarik and Stevan, what is the social good of this censorship project? Because the masses in their chaotic thinking don't understand what's good for themselves. This is a very aristocratic view, or most likely is that they're terrified of the fake democracy that they have created for themselves, because the U.S. wants to neuter Europe. It wants it to be a vassal, and it wants it to be able to be not a king or a queen, but maybe from time to time a rook on the board. Okay, but they certainly want to control it, and they want to benefit from it as well. Energy, for example. But how is the European creating? What is their positive message? Are they protecting people? They're protecting them, or they just don't want others. They don't want their people to hear rational arguments against their governance.
Well, there is talk of protection. There is another legislative raft shortly to come on after the Digital Services Act called the Democracy Shield, which is ostensibly to protect.
What democracy? What democracy?
Exactly. But
democracy, golden dome.
I just want to come back to a word that you used, Stevan, gaslighting. I think before we stick the boot into the European Union, and it certainly deserves it, we must never lose sight of the fact that the Americans are the ones who set up this censorship industrial complex. I'm sure the Europeans did it at the same time, but the Americans started in 2016 with Barack Obama's Foreign Propaganda and Misinformation or Disinformation Act. And they have had for a decade the same galaxy of fact checkers and disinformation, anti-disinformation agencies and policing and all the rest of it, going right up to 2024 when there was the change of the administration. But indeed, yes, you're right, Stevan, they've now turned against the European side of it, but we'll have to see whether they continue or not as they did before in America itself. Tarik, what's your view on this?
Look, one point I would like to raise is that I think that this escalation, or this clear increase, at least in censoring energy in the European Union by the European Commission and its agencies ultimately, it has to be put in the context not only of the general decline of the EU in geopolitical terms, I entirely agree with Stevan, but there is another context at home, which is the decline of the power of the traditional media.
Yes.
And there is even a communication somewhere in that report, I can't remember, but it's again a quote from an EU bureaucrat, I think Agarwal actually, and it basically says, we also have to do this because people are losing faith in traditional media. So the great threat is that the social media become the main source of information for ever more people. And once that happens, the power that you once wielded, I mean, we all remember it, I think. I remember it from being young. What it meant in Western Germany. You had 3 TV channels and they were all aligned more or less with the government. Not as brutally as now, by the way, interestingly enough. But you didn't have social media and you didn't have 100 TV channels even. So the power that you once wielded in these very centralized broadcasting media is gone. And now we're in this intermediate period where the social media power is rising. And I think it's very much about trying to stem that effect that we see this increase in censorship aiming at precisely social media. The other point I would like to raise is that it's not even that they tried or that they did manipulate elections in 6 countries, 5 of them within the EU, 1 of them outside, Moldova still, right? You actually have to add the EU elections itself for what they are worth. They as well were manipulated. And if you really are consistent, the attempt, for instance, to suppress Elon Musk's interview with Donald Trump was an attempt to interfere ultimately in American elections as well. And the report actually tells you about a vice head of the commission going to meet TikTok and saying, I want to talk about 2 things in Europe, and by the way, your elections here in the United States. It's absolutely shameless, right? No boundaries. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. And that's, of course, why the report was written, right? Because its effect also on American citizens. There's a last point I would like to mention, which is, I totally agree with you, John, that there is an irony here. It's not only that the Americans also have a massive system of censorship, it's that all these social media companies aren't innocent. Yes. They themselves have massive censorship systems built into them, right? And when you read the report, Elon Musk is depicted as sort of an innocent victim of punitive measures by the European Union. Well, he's not innocent. He himself, whatever he says about being a free speech absolutist and all these things, we now have the evidence. We know very well that X, like all the others, is heavily, heavily censored. So what we are seeing now, it reminds me a little bit of, I've used this comparison before. Think of Germany before it was united, and when you had like 50 different states, right? None of them had freedom of opinion or speech, none of them. But you could go from one state to the other, and then you could say something that the other state didn't want to hear. And that's the world in which we are. There is no freedom of speech anywhere. You have to sort of, the freedom that remains is in the fact that these different power centers are at least still competing.
Well, and also when we look at the censorship regime in the United States and in Europe, the debate is about there should be free speech. That's already off the table. The real debate is who controls the censorship regime. Okay, is it the private companies? Is it the state? Or who must be subservient to the other? And then you add into the mix that the Europeans want to regulate American companies, which is that's what so much of this uproar was about. And I'm sure Elon Musk made it very easy. He was very generous making this report possible. Okay. But it's not a debate about free speech. It's a debate who controls censorship.
Yeah, indeed.
Stevan, what does it?
Who watches The Watchmen?
You were quite harsh. Well, certainly critical. Let's say in your earlier remarks. Surely people in Serbia, as I imagine people in Russia, see this for what it is. It's just a racket. No.
It is. I mean, because the EU, to begin with, actually, they have interfered in Serbian elections back in 2012, when they ditched their former partner, the pro-EU Democratic Party and Boris Tadic. I'm sorry to bore you with these names, but I just want to show you how the mechanism works. And they found a nationalist who was ready to go all the way with the concessions in exchange for absolute power. And that is what happened. We effectively now live in a semi-dictatorship, which is backed by the EU, but the EU always has members of EU Parliament who don't make any decisions, who are critical of our government, when at the same time Ursula, Macron, and Merz are getting whatever they want when it comes to resources, when it comes to political concessions. So our government, led by Vučić, is basically bargaining with us as chips in order to get their concessions, because they are a typical compradorial elite. So now what we have is that in several Eastern European countries, we have these NATO vassal dictatorships. Zelensky in Ukraine, Maya Sandu in Moldova, this crew in Romania, unstable governments in Bulgaria, which are always pro-NATO in one way or the other. Pro-fascistic regimes basically in the Baltic countries. I mean, I'm sure that they would disagree, but when you look at the almost race laws they have, I mean, maybe this is too harsh, but that, you know, in effect, you have second-class citizens in these countries.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Serbia as well, because basically previous government, they didn't want to dismantle what they called the parallel institutions in Kosovo and Metohija, which were the institutions of Serbia that remained after NATO started the occupation. The former nationalist Vučić was ready to give it all. He delivered, and that is why EU was silent about the state of democracy in the country.
But Stevan, what does Serbia get for its subservience?
Serbia doesn't get anything, but
okay.
the elite.
I just wanted to clarify that. I just want to clarify that.
They get to. This is a very interesting case of mutual blackmail, where, you know, you have a French police which is in possession of the content of the Sky application, which is very incriminatory towards the government in Serbia. I mean, it connects it to international drug trade and things like that. So France is only indicating it has something, but doesn't push through all the way. But all of a sudden, what we see in Serbia is that Belgrade airport is under the concession of a French company. That Serbia is buying Rafale aircrafts for almost 4 billion euros. That France is building the metro system in Belgrade. That France is going to get to build the nuclear power plants. So we became a multi-colony.
Stevan, Russia can do all those things at a bargain, if you want.
The thing is that Serbia became a multi-colony, and every Eastern European country is a special case. So if we want to understand how EU is planning and is censoring its own citizens with this digital act, we have to see the practice of their colonial, power wielding in their colonies. And Eastern European countries, the countries that are striving, I mean, nobody asks the citizens, but they're striving to get into the EU. These mechanisms already exist there, and then they are important. You know, you have this very famous writer from Martinique, Aimé Césaire, whose main argument was that basically Hitler was inherent to Europe centuries before he came to power, because the methods that he used against European countries and his own citizens were those that the European colonizers were using abroad, and it just mirrored. I mean, now people are making the same argument about ICE, that the Americans were behaving like that in Fallujah, and that now it came back, to Minneapolis and so on. So
but Stevan, you have the EU that wants to colonize Serbia, but it's the United States, and this is a new form of imperialism. The US wants to colonize Europe.
Yes, exactly. And many Serbs are happy about it, because our local hegemon is the EU. So, I mean, this is very much realpolitik, maybe Schmittian way of looking at things. We know that the Americans are not generous, or that their conduct doesn't come from a place of virtue. But at the same time, weaker EU means that there is a chance that we can have some change in Serbia. and other countries of Eastern Europe. Because what I do see now is that although the United States and Russia are in a proxy conflict for the last several decades, I would say much more than we would tend to see in the at the first glance, I think that they have mutual understanding that the EU is a problem for both, and I think that is why they are in some kind of coordination. But when I say coordination, doesn't mean that they are micromanaging and talking about every single move, but they are recognizing what the mutual interest is. So now Americans are behaving towards European countries, when you look at all these tariffs, the same way that the European countries were behaving towards their ex-colonies.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Russia is not willing to go for some kind of half measures that can backfire politically in Russia if they, all of a sudden stop the military activities, and then maybe their citizens might ask, okay, why did we lose so many people to get nothing and to get Ukraine into NATO eventually, one way or the other, or another. So I think that the EU became a problem for everyone, including EU citizens, and the way that the elite is trying to protect themselves is more censorship, which I think will only act as an acceleration machine for actually continuation of its demise.
I think this brings us back to the topic we were discussing last week, Trump's foreign policy. What is the policy? Obviously, it's a policy of extraction of wealth, just as you said, Stevan. The European Union is practicing vis-a-vis Southern and Eastern Europe. That's pretty clear. But is it all a game of smoke and mirrors? Is it just outsourcing, the war that they started with Russia to the Europeans, and, keeping money back for other adventures? Marco Rubio is coming to Europe very soon, I think, and is visiting. I think he's going to the Munich Security Conference and then visiting Slovakia and Hungary, the two countries which are explicitly named in the new Dutch government's coalition agreement as being in the crosshairs for a new European push to abolish unanimity in foreign policy. So the Dutch, and no doubt many other governments, want to abolish unanimity in foreign policy, and they specifically mention Slovakia and Hungary as the countries that need to be sidelined. And yet Rubio is going to see them, going to those two countries, which is really quite striking, actually. Particularly when you think that only a year or two ago, Xi Jinping, he didn't go to Slovakia, but of all the countries in Europe that he visited, he chose Serbia and Hungary, these objectively small countries. A very surprising choice.
Yeah, but Tarik, is this? I'm glad that John teed it up this way. Is this just a divide and conquer strategy on the part of Marco Rubio? More chaos for the European Union is good for the United States?
Look, my sense is that the European Union has, of course, always been, like NATO, a project of preserving American power over first Western Europe and then Europe more generally, as far as they can go, right? And they miscalculated, which is why we have a Ukraine war. But what has been changing in both organizations and in the European, or in the relationship to the European Union as well, I should say, is that the status of these clients or vassals has been degraded. And it is being openly degraded, right? We are now entering, and this they have shown us very, very clearly from the side of the American administration. You saw that Turnberry itself, its solution of the tariff wars, as it were, for now they're not over. The Europeans are now really targeted for very rough exploitation. At the same time, I think the Americans do want to maintain their leverage in Europe, right?
Yeah.
They still want a basis. They also want to be able to use European resources, military and economic, for what they are worth, right? Even if Europe is declining, there's something with which the Americans want to work. They're pragmatic that way. But the type of control that they want to exert has been becoming much rougher. So when Vance gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference, and when Rubio now travels to these two rebels or outliers, right, Slovakia and Hungary, I unfortunately would be very skeptical. I do not see any American benevolence toward us.
I'm not saying that.
Oh no, I know you're not, but not even to the European right. People in the AfD, for instance, in Germany, you know, I'm German. Some of them romanticize the American engagement. They think they have real friends there. And the Americans are never friends to anybody. I mean, if they're friends to you, you're in a very, very bad place in reality. So it's possible, I think it is absolutely true that the Americans are now playing games with the new right, with fissures inside the European Union. They've always done that, of course. They're different games now. But none of this is in any way aimed at doing something for ordinary Europeans.
Oh, of course.
This is not what is happening here at all.
Yeah.
Let me add.
I think it's important to say that Robert Fico, the Slovak Prime Minister, is not from the right. He is from the left originally.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Yes.
I don't think he classifies himself as right, although I can't actually remember now which group he's in the European Parliament, but he's definitely a man of the left. John, what does it look like from Africa, this censorship industrial complex? We can't hear you.
You're on mute. You're on mute. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Before we were recording, I was joking about our infrastructure here being very broken. But in many ways, it's a blessing in disguise.
Jerm, since you brought it up, can you tell us the joke? This is a good one.
Well, I was just saying that before we had candles, we had electricity. But the reality also is that there's a sense of freedom in the chaos. So, for example, we have huge amounts of free speech here, and that's by virtue of the broken system. And I sometimes wonder whether or not there should be an accelerationist, dare I say it, an accelerationist kind of desire for the implosion of these structures across Europe, because it doesn't seem like anything is stopping that train that seems to be getting faster and faster and faster. So in a way, do you want to see the implosion so that there can be more chaos, which can invariably lead to more freedom?
The worse the better.
It's a weird dichotomy. I apologize.
Tim hůře, Tim luce.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, well, I think Tarik is a man of the left, and we love him. But
true.
Those of us on the right that cannot go the better, the worse. That's just it's gentlemen. I mean, this conversation focuses my attention on two issues. Number one, the European elites need this censorship to not only keep the EU together, but to expand it and to limit electoral possibilities in the future, because they want, the European Union is ailing, it's weakening. No, they are still got their eyes on the prize. They want to create a super state, and censorship is one of the easiest ways to do it. Second issue is that what is Trump's foreign policy? Well, he wants everybody to pay for American empire, including its allies, or I don't know if that word is in vogue anymore, but everyone's got to pony up to pay for this empire, because if you're going to get $1.5 trillion for the next year, so it's got to come from somewhere, okay? Because at a certain point, you cannot. The debt situation is getting very critical, and the American middle class is barely in existence. It's already been squeezed for almost all of its wealth. Okay, so the rest of the world is going to have to pay for it. You have to pay $1 billion to be at the board of peace. Okay, where that money goes, who goes into a private bank account somewhere. So those are the two issues, furthering the development of a super state in Europe, which will create, I don't think the Americans would have a problem with it as long as the vassal, and everyone has to pay for empire.
Well, hold on, Peter. Sorry, I was actually alluding to a point earlier. I've been to Europe a few times now. I'm saying that only because I'm an outsider looking in. So when you are there, you're less likely to see the macro changes, if that makes sense. You'll only see it over a period of time when you look back. Right. So I can immediately see that it's fine to talk about the state infrastructure and its impositions on Europeans. But what about the Europeans themselves? I very, very quickly see a sense of containment. Europeans themselves are very compliant and don't want to rock the boat. So it's fine to talk about them, the state, and all those elites. But what about the people themselves? Why aren't they just simply saying no?
Well, if I may, look, that brings us back to your original point, I think, if I understand it correctly, about a sort of accelerationism, right? Should we wait for this to come down? And my sense is I'm not an accelerationist, not because I'm of the left, but because I'm a historian. I know what happens once you've accelerated enough. It's not good. But
yeah, I live in Russia. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Well, I mean, another way of saying that is revolution versus evolution, I suppose.
But exactly, and if you put it like that, I personally don't think that the EU can be reformed anymore. I used to. At the time of the Greek crisis, 2015, I still had that illusion, like a Varoufakis thing, right? I don't think so. I think the EU has become far too dangerous. But after all, the EU sits on top of functioning, more or less, nation states, which have much more historic weight than the EU will ever have. Compare in that sense, it's a far-fetched comparison, but do compare with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had collapsed, but it didn't lead to absolute chaos. It could have, but it didn't. What emerged was an alternative system of states out of the ethno-federal structure of the Soviet Union. The comparison is wobbly, but in the European case, the chances of doing without the EU are much, much better. The EU isn't necessary to avoid return to chaos. You could remove the EU if you do it in the right way and return to more or less functioning nation states. I'm not saying it would be easier. I'm not saying it would be without sacrifices. Obviously, it would in some way weaken Europe in a first phase at least. But the way the EU is now, what could be weaker than Ursula von der Leyen giving everything in tariff negotiations to the Americans and getting nothing at all in return? How much worse can it get, right?
Good point.
I very strongly agree with you, and I think the comparison with the Soviet Union strengthens your argument because, of course, the entities which emerged from that state, that territory, were more or less artificial. I mean, in varying degrees, weren't they? Obviously, Ukraine and Belarus and so on. Whereas the entities underlying the European Union are absolutely not artificial. But I'm actually troubled now by a much more banal and rather concrete question for once, instead of something historical, world historical and philosophical. There is a lot of talk about banning X at European level and at national level, and you've made an allusion to this, Tarik, the famous letter that Thierry Breton sent in August 2024, telling Elon Musk not to interview Donald Trump. Well, Breton got his comeuppance a week or two later, as it happens. But the talk of banning X, obviously they've imposed a 120 million euro fine on it, which is not nothing. But in Britain, for example, and obviously in France, there's legislation now to restrict access to social platforms. There's talk about banning X. That surely, leaving aside grand historical geopolitical questions, surely a European attack on an American champion, on a gigantic American company, on a very prestigious American company, were it to happen, that surely would be a real rift, worse, I think, even than the rifts we've seen now up to date in the transatlantic alliance. What do you think?
Who
or
do you have
Tarik
in
or
mind?
Stevan,
Oh,
whoever wishes to answer that.
please.
Okay, let me just before I go back to the question of X, you've mentioned Marco Rubio's visit to Europe.
Yeah.
There's another component why he's visiting Hungary, and that is the Hungarian elections. Because Orban is in a serious trouble now, and he might lose the elections. At the same time, Orban has created his own parallel structure, including education and science. So Marco Rubio actually has a lot of friends at one of those places, and that's the Matthew Corvin Institute and the Matthew Corvin University. So
I was a visiting fellow there.
Yeah, so that his visit is of a significance. It says, I stand with my people. I stand with Orban, maybe even if he doesn't say that. So that is also in a way maybe going to be seen from Brussels as meddling in European elections, as interference.
The pot calling the kettle black. Wow.
Exactly. I mean, it's like the three Spider-Mans, accusing each other who is the real one. So that is what we see here. They are playing essentially the same game, but with different ideological tastes. So that's one thing. And the question of whether X is going to be banned or not is a part of the same thing. Because what if, for instance, the EU decides to ban X, and a dissident country, let's say Hungary or Slovakia or some else, Poland maybe even, decides not to participate in that scenario. I think that EU really has a lot of weak spots, which might cause further divisions within the Union. And I think that these divisions are inevitable. As Tarik said, EU cannot be reformed. The only question is how will this scenario of its dissolution, or let's say transformation, look like? Will it be an evolution or a revolution? I tend to think that we are not going to have this, final countdown and an event that will change everything, but a series of events that will historically, in historical perspective.
But surely to John's important question here, and this is both to Stevan and Tarik, a benchmark would be banning X, okay?
Yeah.
And that would be a huge admission of failure on the part of the plutocrats in Brussels.
Yeah.
Because a lot of who control. I remember I told one of my Russian friends, I said, did you know in Europe that they're mandating the size of a pint all across the European Union? And he said, who cares how big the glass is as long as there's beer? Okay. And that's a really good point. And the reason why I bring it up is that, we can talk about information, disinformation, malinformation, but a lot of people use Twitter in Europe. Okay. I mean, this is a service, that, if you want to call it that everyone presumably can participate in. You're going to be some bureaucrat in Brussels saying to all of you, you can't use it. That would be, Stevan, that would be a benchmark in what this transformation. What do you?
I agree, but I think that as you said, maybe the pint gets broken and you take a ceramic glass instead. So another vessel will be found, another platform will emerge, definitely, that will fill in the gap. This whole talk began actually in the US right after the 24 elections. First, there was a very interesting interview on CNN with a comedian, Tim Dillon. And the journalist was trying to make this construction that Joe Rogan is to be blamed for victory of Donald Trump and the demise of Kamala Harris.
I thought it was Putin.
Yeah, well, they forgot about it. Now,
Yeah,
now with
Putin was dethroned.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I think Epstein's greatest crime is not admitting Musk come to the island. I mean, he thought he was uncool. But anyway, the thing about the change, there's this shift in media is very significant. Right after that, all of a sudden, everybody started talking about Nick Fuentes. And then he only became bigger because of this scare. So I think that if Europe really decides to push harshly on the censorship option, if they decide to ban Twitter, X and other platforms that they see harmful for the corruption of brains of Europeans, then I think that it will only backfire through another form, because the genie is already outside.
Well, I would suggest to you guys go to an antique store and find a physical typewriter and get some paper, okay? Because you're going to go to samizdat the way things are going. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't mention the Epstein case for just by chance, because I think this is maybe let's say a turning point. USA. This is a point which is really significant, because now we see that all of the elites were corrupt. I'm very happy that all the Serbian enemies from the 90s are all on the list.
Yay!
But listen. If
none of us are on the list, so I'm having a great time with.
Yeah, we're not cool enough, I think.
If we're being honest with ourselves, though, if you look at Twitter, it's actually a great thing that they ban it. They should ban TikTok also, and OnlyFans. I mean, if you're talking about the corruption of the youth, I mean, I think it was Catherine Orson-Fitz who said about 2 or 3 weeks ago that the average IQ in Iran and China is around 110 to 112, and in the US has now dropped below 100.
Well, I mean, look, I personally, look, I feel that the problem with the EU bureaucracy, right, which has taken command in a radical way, it's a bit like Stalin and his apparatus, really, right? It's the executive that has taken command. The problem with the EU bureaucracy is that they are not necessarily reasonable at all, even in their own interest, right? So it's very hard to predict what they will actually do or try to do. But if they were reasonable, then trying to forbid something big like X would be a terrible mistake, I believe. First of all, because of the backlash. And the backlash would take shape at national levels. For instance, the AfD would work with it. I expect that Farage and Reform UK would make hay of that. I expect that the Rassemblement National would work with it. So there will be a terrible political price if they do this. It would be an own goal, I would assume. And
well,
the
counter argument is that Putin runs X, not Elon Musk.
Well, yeah, but the thing is,
and I say that seriously because out of the UK, John and I talked about this, is that the whole Epstein affair, its origins is in Moscow. I mean, this is the logic that they use.
Yes, but I mean, on that one, that's a good example, because my sense is that with that particular play that they're trying to do Russiagate or Russia Rage 2, with Epstein and the Epstein affair, they're really jumping the shark. I cannot imagine that they can find a lot of resonance anymore. They're exposing themselves, they're exposing the flimsiness of their own arguments. They're not really arguments.
That's why they want censorship. That's why they need censorship.
Yes, but then again, that's the trap for them, right? The more they rely on suppression, censorship, maybe even forbidding a whole platform, the less they can convince or persuade large swaths of the population who just won't get along or go along. And with X, I think this would be a very bad move, precisely because it's not that big. It's not as big as Facebook, but it's still popular enough to have a mass effect inside European polities. But the other thing I think that one should mention here is that there is a reason that all of these companies are American, except, of course, TikTok, which has a very interesting history in that respect, as we all know. the Europeans aren't even in a position to quickly develop their alternatives. It's not that simple, right? And that's a weakness as well that I think should constrain them if they were reasonable.
And if it were a pan-European platform, it would be run by a government official, okay? And that would send a signal automatically that this is just a packaged apparatus to deliver the message that you talked about in West Germany in the good old days, okay? I don't think that will fly. Anyway, Twitter isn't that big. It's just people like us are on it.
No, there are like 1 billion people that use it. It's pretty big.
The frequent users, and like 95%, maybe 97% are extremely passive, that never post anything. They read it, but they never post. It's basically a psychopathic space.
But I mean, if you were to take a more stoic approach to this, if they were to attempt to ban X, there would be the pendulum effect, right? So they will immediately see who are the people attempting this, and go onto the attack and start supporting the opposition movements. So it will create a very strange counterbalance.
Well, we haven't, by the way, mentioned one other aspect, and we haven't mentioned it because it's not in the Judiciary Committee report, which is the proposed chat control, the proposal to subject all text messages to screening in the European Union. Of course, it's
John, if I may.
Yeah.
Except those of high European bureaucrats. They're exempt. They are. No, literally.
Caesar's wife is above suspicion, as we know. But I mean, again, that is just massive. And of course, in France, where I live, they are planning to restrict access to social networks to people under the age of 15, which means everyone will have to register their identity to prove that they're over 15. So it's another way of doing the same thing. Why did Germany? I understand that Germany blocked an earlier attempt to impose chat control. Do you have any information on that, Tarik?
No, I don't. I would really have to speculate, and I can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. Well, I am sure it'll go through because these things have a tendency to go through. But of course, that would just be, I mean, maybe it wouldn't be as high profile as the banning of X, but it would nonetheless be an absolutely incredible, I mean, talk about the Stasi steaming over open envelopes. I mean, this is just on a
John,
exactly.
John, hold on. But banning is also not terribly productive because it will simply lead to a huge influx of VPNs and workarounds. They'll develop new browsers. It just simply doesn't work.
You can make the argument of the opposite. Where I live right now, there's a lot of machinations about getting access to Facebook, and so most people just gave up on it. It can go that way too.
You know, Peter, what you're saying there, if I may, it's really interesting. I think when you do something like that and you push people to go for VPNs and similar solutions, right? And Turkey has done some similar stuff. It might even be a very interesting effect where you basically split the population, right? You split the population in the part that will do it, which is probably always smaller, who knows, and the part that will remain within the very well-controlled sphere that you've narrowed down this way, right? But it's hard to say what will come out of that, right?
Well, also let's not overestimate ourselves, gentlemen. Here, Facebook, for example, we're assuming that, for example, in Russia, people use Facebook for political speech. Well, but probably most of them don't. Okay, so I mean, we don't have to overestimate it, and well. Okay, it's difficult to have access to Facebook, so you go to the Kontakti, they're the Russian version of it, and people are quite satisfied with that too.
Or Telegram, which is much more popular.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. Oh, by the way, there was a big, I don't know who generated it. It was a big scare yesterday, as that Telegram is going to be regulated, and there'll be certain VPNs that you can use. That was like wildfire. It started early in late
Pavel
morning.
Durov has said that himself on X today. I've just seen it. That it's going to be regulated.
So far, no impact here. I mean, Twitter, and Steven's right. Telegram makes the world go round here. I don't know about in your case.
No, I wouldn't say it does. It's
I'm looking at like Serbia. In Serbia,
Serbia,
Telegram became more and more popular as I would say here the regime is trying to crack down the internet by buying certain platforms, websites, and so on. So Telegram really became big in the last, I would say, year and a half, maybe since the acceleration of protests in Serbia. They're still going on, the student protests. So I think that Telegram or such platforms are the present and probably the foreseeable future, because Facebook is already very old-fashioned. I think that younger people are not almost not using it at all. It became a boomer network in a sense. Even Instagram is declining. TikTok still remains, and I think Telegram, which is some kind of a hybrid system with the components of all, including the stories, is really used. And I think that, of course, governments around the world for different motives are scared from it from time to time. I think that the Iranian case is very interesting because the whole country was without internet for some days, and those who had access to internet were in big trouble.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sorry, please.
Go ahead, Tarik. Go ahead. That will wind up.
Yeah, as Iran has come up, I mean, the other thing I believe is very interesting about Iran is that it's such a brutal, open version of using the internet from outside to wage war on a country, right? No, it's not even just subversion; it's actually literal war, right?
It brings us back to Elon Musk.
Yes, that as well. But what it also does is, yes. But what it also does is, I think, it's a reminder that the stakes here, which are about sort of whatever you call it, digital sovereignty, are incredibly high. So the fact that the European Commission and its agencies are fighting over something here and the Americans are fighting back isn't so astonishing. What is so dispiriting is, frankly, from my perspective, that this is not Europe's national governments trying to guard their national digital sovereignty and free speech at the same time.
Just before you end, John.
Go on, John.
One thing that we can observe is that China has done its best to guard its own digital sovereignty.
Yes. That's an extreme case, yeah.
Well, again, let's not lose sight of the absolutely essential distinction, which is that Iran closed down the internet because it believed that it was being manipulated by an outside force determined to provoke civil war. And with indeed some success, because the numbers of people killed are very high, whereas the attempt to control the internet in Europe, the only possible justification of it would be that the European elites or the European structures are somehow threatened by their own people or are somehow at war with their own people.
There's a contrast. I agree with you. That's a massive difference. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, so of course we're in favor of sovereignty. I'm certainly in favor of sovereignty, but this is the perverted form of it, isn't it? Because the only logical way that you can interpret these moves is to say that the people expressing their views are a danger to the state. There's no suggestion, not even from Brussels, not even from Thierry Breton. Well, there is, of course, actually, sorry, I beg your pardon, there is a suggestion, isn't there, that this is all being manipulated by Musk. So they are, in a way, half using that analogy.
Just quickly,
if I may, add one piece, which is that if you look at the report, what's also interesting is that some of the motivations internally of these EU documents are very clear, right? They list things as anti-elite, anti-government, anti-EU as reasons for censorship or suppression at least. So that's obviously the self-defense of a power elite.
Exactly.
Just quickly, before you close, John, this just came in Peter, you might find this interesting. So Russian authorities have begun throttling Telegram. Users have reported widespread disruption starting on the 9th of February after the Federal Communications Watchdog, I cannot pronounce that, Roskomnadzor, there we go, announced phased restrictions on the app, citing alleged legal violations and what the government calls Telegram's failure to curb its use for criminal and terrorist purposes. Peter?
It's intellectually, of course, I'm very much opposed to this, and I worry about it. But terrorist threats are very real here right now. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's taken very, very seriously. And irrespective of what happens, the final outcome in Ukraine, Russia's going to have to be mindful of terrorism for a very long time.
But again, that's the implication is that there's some kind of external threat, whereas, as Tarik just said, the language of the US report, which lists anti-elite discourse, anti-elite narratives as a security threat. This is, by the way, in the Netherlands, for example, a year and a half ago, the Dutch intelligence services, the Dutch security services produced a report saying that people who undermined trust in the institutions and trust in government, that they were a danger to democracy. So this thought, this idea that undermining confidence in governments is somehow a threat to the state, that is very
And that was the very reason why I was banned from Twitter for a time being. Right. That was the rationale. Durov, when he's had a lot of run-ins with the Russian authorities. That's why he hasn't lived here for a very long time. But he did make a lot of compromises. That's what I understand. It hasn't affected my use of it all because I just use it for friends. Okay, but they've found something, and being a free speech advocate, I have to say, but. We've had a number of very high-profile terrorist events and attacks, and I don't want to see any more of that. And if the authorities have a way of curbing that, then I'm going to have to defer that way. Russia's in a state of war right now. Okay, we're at war. Okay, well, let's flag that one up then to be followed, and maybe we'll have to have another issue of the forum on Telegram and on. Sure. On information security or whatever around the world. Tarik, Cyril, Amar, thank you so much. Stevan, Gajic from Belgrade, you've been very kind with your time, and it's been fabulous listening to you. Thank you to you both, and thanks to our viewers for watching. And here it's me again connecting people. Stevan and Tarik are very close friends of mine. Thank you.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.